These two boxes of Rallyman are jam-packed with possibilities, and it's my intention to highlight all of the interesting things you can do with them. This is Shakedown. In today's Shakedown, we're going to start a conversation by talking about the weather. Welcome to a typical day in Wales. The sun pokes out from behind the clouds now and again, but in this particular stage of rallying that's not going to happen for much longer. WRC 8 features dynamic weather that you can tweak a little to your own liking. You'll probably want some realistic weather, but for a serious challenge you can choose to have a stage go through dramatic changes from start to finish, and we'll have to contend with all the differences in gameplay that come with it. For starters, you'll need to turn your lights and wipers on as your visibility decreases. Then your braking points change as the stage gets slicker and you hunt for the grip. As the puddles fill up, your speed drops to make sure you can get through them safely, and by the end of the stage, the victor may well be determined by who survived it the best. If the stage gets worse when it gets wetter, surely it gets better as it gets drier. Well, yes, it will do, but not immediately. Puddles don't just disappear the instant the sun comes out, nor does the mud dry up. You'll finish the stage and maybe even the entire rally by the time the roads are back to normal. Can Rallyman provide this level of detail with regards to simulating such changes in the weather? Sort of, maybe. Let's have a look, shall we? There are a number of official rules regarding weather. In Rallyman GT, the weather changes instantly as a result of damage tokens pulled when someone loses control, and will change back just as quickly if another weather token is pulled from the bag later on. In the RX expansion, the same thing happens, but the weather only ever changes once to show that rallycross races are much shorter than circuit races. The problem we've got when it comes to Rallyman Dirt is that those weather rules target our dashboards, flipping them to a wet or dry side, which most of the rally dashboards don't have, as they're far more concerned with the type of surface you're on. The 110% expansion suggests we flip the tiles over instead, which makes some sense for asphalt flipping into snow tiles and vice versa, but it doesn't make much sense when it comes to the other tiles, and in rare cases of stage design using certain tiles, it won't work at all. It does keep drivers on their toes and tests them against the unexpected, but this flipping idea doesn't quite sit right with me, perhaps only for the hassle of having to rebuild the stage whenever a weather token is pulled. Other expansions have tokens that we could make use of, such as Climb's cloud tokens or Copilot's water hazard tokens, but we still need to come up with some rules for how to apply them to a rally stage should the weather change. And of course we'd need those tokens, or a proxy of them, and good luck getting hold of the Copilot expansion anytime soon. But something like this may be the best way forward, as applying a token to a tile or a stage is already familiar to us through the rules for taking shortcuts. So we have various bits and bobs that we could work with or repurpose into weather rules, but what we don't have is a system for determining any changes in the weather that don't occur as a result of someone losing control and drawing a weather token. Luckily for us, Rommix has solved these problems long ago with the dynamic weather rules. Today we're going to be rallying through Stage 3 of the Wales Rally, as created for Rallyman by Jonathan Williams, and you can find the previous stages of the event on the Tracks and Roadbooks website. As it is a very technical stage, and because I accidentally made use of it last time out, we're going to allow the use of the handbrake turn variant rule from 110%, which will give us more flexibility in the corners. We're going to assume that the stage has already been swept, so nobody will be considered the leader. The damage bag contains gear, brake and coast die damage, as well as green flags and the weather tokens from 110%. You don't have to have the weather tokens in the damage bag, but they will give another chance for the weather to change should someone draw a weather token, and as we're testing weather-related rules, we want that possibility. The fastest driver through the changeable conditions is the winner. So what are the weather rules that we're going to be testing? In a nutshell, we have an initial weather condition and a forecast, and then every other round we will see how the forecast changes the current weather condition to ultimately determine whether the race is now dry or wet. We can do this with some custom weather tokens in their own weather bag, or by using a 10-sided die, and the D10 is how we'll be checking the weather today. By keeping an eye on the weather track, and by knowing how likely the forecast is to changing the weather conditions one way or the other, we can approach races with a bit more strategy, in that we can decide when to come into the pits to change tyres based on educated guesses about when the weather will change, rather than having a compromised turn or two by being on the wrong tyres when it finally does. But there aren't any pit stops in rallying, of course, so we're just using the dynamic weather rules to determine if a stage is wet or dry, and we'll apply some additional rules should the conditions be wet. We're going to set the initial weather to cloudy as though we randomly rolled a 5, and the forecast to rain as if we rolled an 8. So it's likely to turn into a wet race, but when that will happen will be determined by the dice. For those who know the dynamic weather rules, we'll be using 2 spaces of hysteresis. For those who don't know the rules, I'll explain what that is as and when it comes up. It's like a buffer zone to reduce the likelihood of conditions flipping from dry to wet and back again in an instant. After our weather check, if the current conditions are wet, we're going to draw a shortcut token, and the effects of that token will last until the next weather check. An OK results in no additional rules. The stage is wet, but we've not encountered anything that we can't deal with. Our tyres are working fine, and our skills aren't really being tested. A -1 token will reduce all speed limits we encounter by 1, which will stack with any that have been drawn as a result of any actual shortcuts that have been taken. The conditions have changed enough that we have to be careful when going through corners, but we can still navigate them however we like according to all applicable rules. A coast damage token won't deal any damage to the cars, but it will mean that we can't place as many coast dice as usual. The stage has gotten to the point where we can't make as much progress through it as we'd like, through whatever reason you can imagine. A lack of visibility, loads of puddles, and so on. Whatever token gets drawn, we'll have something else to deal with on the next couple of turns. It might not affect us too much, or it might mean we get bogged down amongst the hairpins and make little progress. That's rallying, but who's rallying? We'll be the local lad, Elfin Evans, in the yellow R6, and we'll be up against some strong competition, all set to their medium difficulty. Thierry Neuville is in the purple R6, and while his skills on the asphalt won't be very useful on this gravel stage, his determination will at least allow a reroll of a hazard result on a gear die. Equally determined is Oit Tanak in the blue R6, but he does have the flat-out trait, so he might lose control at some point. Finally, the orange R6 is being driven by Sebastien Ogier, a specialist on the gravel and adaptable with his dice results. A tough opponent even at this difficulty, as you'd expect from an 8-time champion. Let's randomise the starting order and see what the weather brings. We are third out on stage in a Wales that is looking cloudy and will hopefully be wet. We're going to find out in a couple of turns. First of all, Oit Tanak has to take things away. He is going to re-roll the highest gear die with a hazard and 1 coast die with a hazard. Gets rid of one of them, but given the first corner is a low speed corner, he's only going to be able to get up to second gear next round, and he is probably going to be making use of the handbrake turn rule, and that will allow him to drop into the inside in first gear and then coast around the next hairpin before emerging in second gear. And then I think he can get all the way up to fifth gear if he is committed to going through the shortcuts. On the start line behind him is Thierry Neuville, and Thierry is not re-rolling any dice. He's going to do much the same and get up to second gear on the first corner. So next round, and the round marker is turning from black to white, and whenever that happens we're going to re-roll the weather die and see how the forecast has affected things. On this occasion, the forecast for showers says that when we roll a 1 or a 2, we actually move towards the sunnier part of the day. We started on space 5, we're actually going to go back here into a partly cloudy day. Even though our forecast is for rain and showers, anything can happen, and we are currently still in a dry race. So, Oit Tanak is going to take his next turn. He's going to re-roll that die, and he is committed to going through the shortcut. He has to use the hazard on the brake die to do that, so that will double his hazards. He might as well then go through the next one in order to get up to fifth gear in that space. However, we do have to take some shortcut tokens, and he will have a harder time going forward. Thierry is going to re-roll nothing. He's going to go up to fifth gear. We are on the start line next, and we're going to do much the same as everyone else. 1 coast to coast 2. Flat out for us, just the 1 hazard, and that will put us in first corner. Back to Oit Tanak, who has 1 coast die from his original 2. He's in fifth gear. He's going to drop to fourth, brake down to second, coast through, and the best he can do is emerge in third gear. Thierry Neuville is going through some shortcuts. He was close to losing control, and he might have to use his determined trait here. So let's have him reroll gear 3, and he gets rid of that hazard. So he can now place it on the shortcut without doubling it. And again, drive straight through in order to come out in 5th gear in the sliding space. -1 coast die. Everyone is getting damaged going through these shortcuts. Let's see what we do. I would also like to make use of the handbrake rule, and that will put me there. Now, if we end here in third gear, that won't be good for our time, but it will give us an opportunity to slow down for the hairpins. Flat out on these, just the one hazard and a third gear finish. And joining the start line is Sebastian Ogier, who is formidable. He's only going to need gears 1, 2 and another couple of coasts in order to get into the first corner. Next round is a white round. We're going to check the weather again. We are currently partly cloudy and we have rolled a 7, which means we are pushing it back 1 space towards cloudy. So we are back where we started. The rain hasn't come yet. It will come as soon as we roll some high numbers though. Let's see what Oit can do while it is still dry. Oit is re-rolling his first gear. Gets rid of a hazard. So he's in third gear, and 1 coast down means he's going to have some problems in this upcoming corner. I think he probably wants to end in 4th gear so that he can go down on the inside on the next turn. Drop to 4th, break down to 2nd, coast through, and a gear 3 finish for Thierry. I want to avoid the shortcuts, so I want to drop down to 1st gear, go through the hairpins like you should, and that will allow us to go into 2nd. Do we want to stay in 3rd? It's a middly gear for the time, but it will allow us to drop to 1st and then have a long run towards the next hairpin. So I'm going to do that, and I am going to risk a flat out roll. Absolutely flawless. What can Ogier do to catch up? He can go up to 5th gear. Next round, Oit Tanak is going to want to break down to 2nd, which he can. It's his only hazard of the turn. He's going to have to coast through the inside, and he will, let's see, he can instead go on the outside, give him some options, and then go over the jump in 4th, and that will allow him to get around the water hazard. And he could end his turn in 5th, and if he does so in the slide space, he will give himself more of a chance to get around the corner in multiple different ways. Thierry is behind him. Again, he's not going to be able to get to the corner, so he wants to get the speed. What are we going to do? Unfortunately, we can't overtake Thierry, I don't think. So how far can we get? Can we get up to 5th next to him? 4th, 3rd, 2nd. Yes, we can. Can we make that a little easier for ourselves? I think we can indeed. We can do something like that. That is more of a risk to go flat out, but I think we can manage it. Famous last words. Let's see what we get. Just the one hazard puts us in 5th gear. Thierry realizes that there is someone beside him. Finally, Ogier is going to be going through the shortcuts, and he's going to use his adaptable trait to re-roll 5th gear to get rid of the hazard, allowing him to place it, and that will be a 5th gear finish for him. Next round turns to the white side. We're going to check the weather again. We really want to roll a high number to push it through for the rain. We have rolled a 0. 0 is a 10 on a D10, of course. So we're going to move it 2 spaces to the left, which is 1, 2. Now, we are in a mixed space. It's one of the hysteresis spaces. And that basically means that you take the same weather that you've come from. So because we've come from a dry race, we're still in the dry, and we won't be in the wet until we go into a space that is definitely wet. Likewise, on the way back, if we come from a wet space into a hysteresis space, we're going to still be in a wet race. So it is now threatening to rain. We are in space 6.5 on the weather track, and we are going to be expecting some rain coming up on the next couple of turns. So Oit Tanak is going to be first out on track. He's going to find a way to slow down for the next corner. So how can he do that from 5th gear? If he goes like that, drop to 2nd on the inside, coast out and emerge there in 3rd. On the inside is Thierry Neuville, and he is going to hopefully not block the track ahead of us. He needs to break down to gear 3. He can coast to the inside. He's going to have to stop there, so that will block our momentum, as we behind are just going to go flat out on a breakdown to 3rd gear. Ogier at the back, he is in 5th gear, so he's going to drop to 4th, break down to 2nd, coast around the outside, coast once again, and come out in 3rd gear over here. Next round, Oit Tanak is in 3rd gear. He's going to re-roll gear 4, and he might have to use his determined trait. Let's find out. If he breaks down to 1st gear, that's 1 hazard. He doesn't have one of these coast dice, so let's put that there. He can go through in 2nd, up to 5th. He doesn't want to go to 6th because that would be too much for the upcoming corner. Let's see if Neuville gets out of our way. He is going to be very close to losing control. In fact, he has lost control. He does not have any rerolls for these dice, but he can reroll 1 gear thanks to his determination trait. So he wants to really go over the jump somehow. So he's going to have to go like that. That'll put him there in the water hazard, and he can go up to 4th. We could put down 5th gear and give him some options, and of course he is unaware that he is going to lose control, so that's probably what he would have done. 3 damage tokens. That is not the luck that Thierry wanted. He's off the stage in gear 0. We have an opportunity then to get past that stricken purple R6. If we can get over the jump in 4th, that would be nice. So we can, in fact, we can drop to 2nd, come out in 3rd, go over in 4th. That would put us here. And then we could go up to 5th in the space that Thierry was in. I wonder if staying in 4th would be better for the corner. I am going to stay there in 4th. That'll give us options. I'm going to roll these flat out, although that is a risk if the 4 comes up a hazard, which it didn't. So we do get over the jump successfully. Sebastien Ogier is catching up. He is going to re-roll that coast die and get a flawless set of dice. So he probably wants to break down to 1st. He can, let's see, he wants to try and get over the water hazard if he can, which he is able to do if he goes into 4th, which he can do by doing that. He can then, we'll put him there, he can then come into 5th, overtaking us. He is, of course, an 8-time champion, and I am very much not. It's a white round. We are checking the weather, and the weather die is 7, so we are going to check on showers a 7 moves it 1 space towards wet weather. That will mean that it has finally broken into a wet race. So we are going to draw a shortcut token, and that will affect the next 2 turns. That shortcut token is going to be, okay, so the weather hasn't yet affected the turns. We are going to have another couple of rounds where it is still good to race, but we may well get caught up in the weather eventually. We are going to see what Oit Tanak can do on his set of dice. He has 1 fewer coast die available, and he's going to re-roll his gear 6 for a flawless set of dice. So he's in 5th gear. He has to go around the outside of this corner in 3rd. He wants to be able to get down to the next corner, so he doesn't want to go too far. And a 5th gear finish for Oit. Next up is Sebastian Ogier, who has overtaken us. And he is going to re-roll gear 6 and not get rid of a hazard. How does he want to tackle the next few corners? He wants to break down to 3rd. In fact, if instead he's in 4th and then breaks down to 2nd, he can then coast out and then emerge in 3rd, like that. Next up, unfortunately for us, is the return of Thierry. He's in gear 0. He does not have a coast, he does not have a break, and 1 of these gear dice will not be able to be placed. So he has no rerolls, and we are going to put him in 1st gear there, 2nd gear on the inside, 3rd gear. Let's think, he's got no brakes, so the best he can do is 4th gear there. Next up is us, and we would like to try to overtake Thierry if we can. We don't want to get stuck behind him. And to do that, we'd like to be in 5th gear over here somewhere. Can we do that from 4th? We would have to use that space and use that space. And I think that means going through the shortcut. So we're going to break down to 2nd gear through the shortcut and then use the sliding spaces to get out and into 5th gear. That is the plan. Let's see how far we get. We've got lots of focus to pay for dice. 1 hazard on the break means we might be paying for it sooner than we think. 1 hazard on gear 3 says that is for certain. So I'm going to spend 3 focus in order to get rid of the next 2 dice. And that will jump us up in turn order ahead of Thierry. New round, and Oit Tanak is going to try to navigate this next corner. He re-rolls gear 4 and his 1 coast. So he's in 5th gear. He needs to be in 4th and break down to 2nd. And unfortunately, he's going to stay there on the outside of the corner. Next on track is Sebastian Ogier. He is going to lose control. It happens to everybody. So at the end of this turn, he's going to spin out unexpectedly. He doesn't even manage to re-roll that hazard. However, his traits will allow him to get around some problems. What does he want to do? He probably wants to break down to 1st. That's 1 hazard. He can coast through. He can come up to 2nd. He can, or he will have to, re-roll this die using adaptable. Gets rid of that. Is there a better way for him to navigate this corner? If he instead drops to 2nd, that will give him the chance of going up through the gears. That would be better. So he could finish there in 5th. What is he going to pull? It's not going to be pretty, but that's rallying. We haven't even got into the rain fully yet. That's how dangerous this sport can be. We break the tie for the turn order, which means we do get to overtake Thierry Neuville. we need to brake down to third gear on that space, and we can coast through. We are going to want to keep our speed up, and we are going to want to block the course a little if we can. So we're going to do something like that. I'm not going to roll flat out on those. One hazard on the 3, and the rest are good to roll. The 5th gear finish, and we haven't spent any focus to get there. Thierry then finishes off the round, and he can emerge in 4th like that. Next round is a weather round, so we're going to remove the OK token, and we're going to roll the dice to see which direction the forecast takes us. It is a 7, so we're going to roll. We're going to move, one space further into the wet. So it is now raining for sure, and we are going to pull another shortcut token to see what changes are in store. And we have got a -1 coast. So that is not damage for anyone, but it means that we can't place as many coast die as we would like. That is a problem for most of these drivers. Right, so we are going to roll for Oit Tanak. He's going to roll this set of dice. He's going to re-roll the 5. However, he's not able to use this blank coast die. So how can he get around the stage with that in mind? He is going to, let's think, he can drop to first and go through the gears. I think that is the best bet for him. He can go through the shortcut in 4th gear. That will double the hazard. That is the only hazard of his turn. And a 5th gear finish. Rejoining the track is Sebastian Ogier, and he has all of his dice to roll, but not all of them to work with. So he's going to not re-roll his hazard. He can only use 1 of his coast die, thanks to the weather. He needs to go up through the gears, seeing as he is in gear 0. The best he can do is that. We are next. We're going to have to slam on the brakes, and we are going to not be able to go around the outside with that lack of coast die thanks to the weather. So we're going to take a trip through the shortcut and hope for the best. And we're going to play it safe and just roll those dice. So roll those one by one. That will be a good break through the shortcut. Hazard on the 4 and hazard on the 5. We do get to where we want to be. Thierry does not have a coast, and he won't be able to use the other coast, and he doesn't have a break either. So he's not looking too good. Can't re-roll anything. He would probably want to go through the shortcut as well. Unfortunately, we have given him the inside, which means he will get the jump on us again. And we should have seen that coming, really. Oit Tanak is going first. Unfortunately for him, the lack of coast die, thanks to damage and the weather, means that he is stuck in the water hazard. Sebastian Ogier is next out. He is going to re-roll the 6. Doesn't get rid of a hazard. He can't use one of those coast die, and he can't use 3 of his gears, so doesn't really want to drop down if he can help it, but I think on this turn he's going to have to take the hit. If he goes on the inside, he can at least get out through the gears. He will again go through shortcut. He gets even more damage in his quest to catch up. But he's done well, seeing as he's overtaken 2 cars from the back of the pack. And those 2 cars are Thierry Neuville and us. And he doesn't have brakes, which I forgot. We do have brakes. We are going to use those brakes to drop to 3rd. We only have access to 1 coast die, thanks to the weather. So we're going to use that to go around the outside. And we would like to keep our speed up. So we can get into 4th. we can get into fifth using the slide. I think that is the best thing for us. So one by one, once again. 3 is good, the coast is good, the 4 is good, and the 5 will be good as well. Could have gone flat out. The next round is upon us. We are going to roll the weather die. That is going to be a 7, so we go even further into the wet. I believe we're on the half space, which means we are now on space 8. It is very wet now, and we are going to see what the weather does. It is going to be another -1 coast. Once again, we have less than we are able to make use of. Thanks to the weather and his damage, Hoyt Tanak is not able to use any coasts, so the furthest he can get this turn is there. And behind him is Sebastian Ogier, who also has coast die damage. Let's break to 3 and drop to second, and then use the 1 coast die that we have available to us. Of course, we haven't taken damage like most of these other cars, so that is the best we can do, is end in second gear. I think I'm going to go flat out on those. I think we are good. 2 hazards. I knocked that into a hazard. The tape doesn't lie. And a gear 2 finish. Rejoining the track without brakes and with lots of gear damage and with no coasts is Thierry Neuville. Next round then, the weather effects are still in effect, so we are going to have no coasts for Hoyt. He does have a brake die, and he is going to re-roll gear 6. He can brake down first and use the handbrake turn to get through the inside. That will allow him to get up through the gears with a run like that. We have not seen gear 6 for a long time, if at all. Hoyt has shown us that it is possible on this very technical Welsh stage. Next up is Sebastian Ogier. He is going to want to break down to second in order to get on the inside, and that is both of the hazards that he has. So he's got 3 gears to use. That will mean getting up to 4th gear in that space there. We are next, and I think a straight run is going to be the best. So what are we in? We're in 2nd gear. We are drifting around the outside, so we're going to do that in first. We're going to go up through the gears. 4. Let's see. We don't really want to go into 6th gear. We're going to stay on the water hazard in gear 5, I think is our best bet. We'll be able to break down unless something very, very bad happens. I don't think it will. 1 by 1 for these. 1 is good, the 2 is good, 3 is good, 4 is good, so the 5 and the coast don't matter. And once again, we could have gone flat out. -1 speed limit. So Thierry is probably going to have to go through the shortcut as well. He's in gear 3. He has not lost control. He is re-rolling nothing. He can't really do much, can he? So he can drop to second, and if he drops to first using the handbrake turn, he can at least be on the inside so that he has a straight run on his next turn. Next round then, we are turning over to the white side again. We are going to check the weather, and it is a 7. It gets even wetter. It is definitely not going to be a dry end to this race, and the weather effect for now is okay. So we do at least have some respite from the rain, and we are going to see what Hoyt Tanak can do on what is probably his last turn. So he does get a coast die back, and he is going to re-roll gear 5. Gets rid of a hazard. He wants to ideally cross the line on this turn, but I don't think he can. He's going to break down to 4th gear, coast 5th, 6th, 1 space before the finish line. What can Sebastian Ogier do behind? He will have a 6th gear finish of his own. We would like to brake down to third gear. Indeed, we have to. I'm going to go around the outside and then I think up through the gears we can get into sixth, and that will be our turn. I'm going to roll those one by one. The 3 is good, as are the coasts. You know what's going to happen. The 4 is good, the 5 is good, and the 6th is good. I could have gone flat out. Another round where we are dropping time, unknowingly, I suppose. It's a 6th gear finish nonetheless, as we see what Thierry can do at the back. He can only use 3 of his gears. Next round, we are going to see what Oyt Tanak can do. I'll give you a clue. It's crossed the finish line. Sebastian Ogier is only able to use 3 gears and cross the line in gear 6. We need to brake down to 4th gear in order to respect the speed limit. We have both coasts available to us, so we're going to make use of them, and we're going to go up to 6th gear. Now, given the last few turns have been hazard-free, do I want to risk this one? It would be stupid of me to roll flat out, so that's what's going to happen. Just the one hazard on this occasion, and we get ourselves another 6th gear finish, as we see what Thierry can do at the back with no brakes and just the one coast. He looks like losing control. 2, 3, and a 4, and a 5, and a 1 show hazards. That is definitely a loss of control at the end of this turn. He has not had the best of stages here in a wet Wales, as we go flat out across the finish in gear 6 and watch Thierry limp home, and as expected he doesn't feature at the fast end of the timings. I mentioned that the NPCs should probably have been rolling their coast die in the wet, even though they wouldn't be able to place it, because it does of course give them a second off their final stage times if it doesn't roll a hazard. And so I have adjusted the final stage times to compensate for me failing to roll the right dice on a fair few occasions, and that has led to a pretty interesting set of results. With consistency and a lack of damage, we finish in 4 minutes 39 seconds, a single second ahead of the time-adjusted Oyt Tanak. Hopefully I've not miscounted for either of us at any point, but looking back at him getting stuck at the water hazard, I think I could have easily saved him some time and given him the win as a result. So he's going to want another run through the stage for sure. A few seconds back down the road is Seb Ogier with 4 minutes and 51, and Thierry Neuville does not want anybody to mention his stage time of 8 minutes 28. But the stage times weren't the focus of our race today. What impact did the weather have, and was it enough of one? We could go into a lot of detail regarding the effects of weather on our cars, but Rallyman, while aiming to give you the experience of rallying, is an abstraction of the sport on account of it being a board game, not a simulator. The more detail we put into it, the more convoluted we risk making it, and so I hope that picking a single token to affect a couple of turns is both simple enough to not get in the way, and complicated or random enough to provide a challenge to work around out on track. We didn't see all of the tokens in action, so we won't know how much of an effect they'll have on a race, and we were pushing for wet weather to happen as often as possible, so with a different initial weather setup and a shorter stage, they might have barely any impact on the race, but conversely, like the weather itself, they might make all the difference. You could of course keep track of the weather throughout the day as you tackle multiple stages. If one stage isn't long enough to see a difference in conditions, maybe 3 stages in a row will be. After one race, it's hard to say how this weather system will work, but everything you need to test it out in your own races is freely available from Board Game Geek, and in many more colours and even dimensions than my black and white version that you've seen today. I encourage you to check it out and to experiment with other solutions should you want even more mud in your Rallyman racing. Just remember your new breaking points.